All right.
Any money. But because of
You are us.
All right.
that he built.
Let's go to part 2 of our presentation. We'll talk about the jury case.
Isn't all.
Everybody's favorite subject.
Yeah.
Now, it's named after a vice president, Jerry.
Can't hear you.
Named after a vice president, Jerry. And really, from way back when, yes. And he was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence, believe it or not. So as much as his name has been sullied a little bit by being the namesake for gerrymandering, don't count him out as a bad person. Anybody who signs the Declaration of Independence gets a pass on those things as far as I'm concerned. So he was one of our early vice presidents and also was known for doing a little bit of this too while he was at it.
So you're saying he was human like the rest of us?
He had some flaws, but you know, all in good fun for politics.
Yes, but you didn't think so.
Excuse me. So I think you guys know what the definition of gerrymandering is in general. Redrawing district lines to partisan advantage can also be done in ways that are considered racially motivated, but mostly what we're talking about are political.
Didn't we intentionally do some that were racially motivated, supposedly for positive purposes to increase, no, seriously, to increase minority representative?
It could be. I don't know, but that sounds like it could certainly have happened. It wouldn't shock me if there are some places today that are like that. I mean, I wouldn't put it past it, but I don't know. So for measuring this stuff, we're going to use vote share and seat share. So it's just what it sounds like. Vote share is the percent of the vote that you get for the House. We're talking federal. Seat share is the percent of seats that you get in the House in your state. And so when you compare those two numbers, you can see, are things out of whack? You know, we get a big share of the vote, but not a big seat of the shares, something is wrong. Share of the seats, sorry, something is wrong, and that's the seat gap, vote share minus seat share. A wasted vote is a vote that doesn't help elect a candidate in a very simple way of looking at it. And then you'll hear this term in the news sometimes, this thing called an efficiency gap, which is a more involved calculation, has to do with wasted votes divided by number of total votes. This has been part of the Supreme Court cases that you've been hearing about, or the court cases, the state court cases that you've heard about over the past couple of years. But today, the numbers I'm going to be sharing with you for the most part are the vote share and seat share, because I know how to compute them. I can't compute, the efficiency gap is rather complicated. And I'm afraid to share it to get it wrong. So I'm going to show you some number crunching that I did using the Cook Political Report.
This is why you don't do quantum mechanical calculation, right?
Over my head. So
When they publish that app, they'll use it.
yes, now hopefully you guys can see this, the colors came through, yeah.
Yeah.
So you've got a couple of terms here, packing and cracking, which come up. So there will be a quiz, so be ready. I'm going to ask you which of these is packed and which of these is cracked, so you've got to read this carefully now. Packing is cramming a bunch of people into one district. Cracking is spreading them out all over the place so they don't have enough influence to win in any particular area. So you can see in a place that is 60% blue, 40% red, you would expect none of the results that you see on the right and the left, where the blue wins all the districts or red wins 3 of them. You would expect to see somewhere around 60% of the seats going blue. But so you guys want to take a guess? Which one of those is packed and which one is cracked?
I would guess the first is cracked and the second is packed, but I don't really
Well,
know.
that's backwards.
It's backwards. Okay.
I think the second is packed.
The first is packed, the second is
Well,
cracked.
the first, which is the first, second, third?
What did I say?
Okay, let's ignore the one on the left, right? It's not marked. So it's going to be the one in the middle or the one on the right.
The one in the middle is packed.
And the one on the right? I would say the one in the middle is cracked.
They're both.
They're both what?
They're both packed and cracked.
Really? Is that what you think?
No, I would say the.
Hey, it's easy. If you're red, you were
yes,
packed
I see.
in blue. If you were red, blue got cracked.
Here's how.
It's all on what you want the map to say.
Here's how to understand it. Look, there's a majority of blue up there. If blue wins It ain't cracked, because cracking means you crack the majority.
That's an interesting way to say it. Okay.
Now,
Thank you.
I would say if blue is winning all, you're cracking.
Yeah, you cracked the red.
Yeah, you're cracking, and you're packing in the one on the far right.
So is red Republican and blue Democrat? Are we suggesting?
No, it doesn't matter.
Is this the state of Illinois?
Well, the point is you packed in the right-hand one, you packed the red and cracked the blue. Congratulations.
I'm glad you pointed that because I thought that the middle one was cracked and the one on the right was packed.
Yeah.
From
That's
whose
how I interpreted it, but I need to learn more about this. I'm not an
From
expert
whose
on this.
perspective?
Well,
According to the text he's written up there, he's right. Cracking, the majority party spreads the opposing party in multiple districts to dilute their influence. That's what the middle one does.
it dilutes the influence of the minority, and the one on the right boosts the influence of the minority such that they actually end up with the majority of the seats.
Right. That's how I interpret it. But
You're correct. Yeah, correct. Thank you.
all right, now let's take a look at this. This is the Cook Political Report. You can download the Excel. And I had a lot of fun with this, which is kind of scary, but anyway, this is the Democratic seat share is on the y-axis. That's what's going up on the left-hand side there. That's the Democratic seat share. What percent of the seats in the state did they get for the House of the House of Representatives in that state? How many did they get? What percent did they get? Along the bottom is the share of the vote that the Democrats won. Okay? I'm only talking about the House elections in 2018 in this case.
Where's Illinois?
So that line that's right in the middle is the equal line. And so total, where you see that red dot that says TOT, overall, Democrats got about 54% of the House seats and 54% of the vote. So it was almost identical, meaning it's fair in aggregate. That doesn't mean every state was fair. That's for darn sure. And we'll go into this. The next slide will allow you to see it a little cleaner. But the idea here is that the further you get from that equal line in the middle, the more likely something is gerrymandered or messed around with. With one exception I would give you is that when you look at these that are 100% at the top, that row along the top, or even the 100% that's down along, or the zero down along the bottom, those tend to be states that have like 1 or 2 representatives. So it's harder to, a slight majority can really throw off those numbers bad. So don't let that get to you too much. In other words, let me get to the next slide before you think too much about the stuff that's all the way at the top and all the way at the bottom.
So before you go away from this slide,
Yes.
the important stuff is the stuff within that dotted area.
Right.
Because when you get outside that dotted area, you're getting to states that really have a majority of one party or another. And if you really have a majority of one party or another, then you're going to disadvantage the other party.
Right, but if you're a populous state, you should still be close to that diagonal line. It's only the cases where you have 1 or 2 representatives and you're going to sway the whole bunch.
No, I disagree with that. Let's say you have 80% Republicans in your state.
Yeah.
It's quite likely that most of your precincts are going to go Republican. And that means that those 20% of Democrats are going to be unrepresented. That'll be a 60% gap. But it's natural because your state is just so heavily Republican.
But look at how they actually, if you were to take a regression across that just based on vote share. Look, the lowest vote share is the lowest vote share there being Wyoming is nowhere near as, that's not a 1-to-1 slope.
On the other hand, look, all on the bottom part of the slide, all the stuff that's over to the right are all states we know that are heavily Republican. And on the top part of the graph, all the states that are over to the right, the bottom part to the left, those are Republicans. The top part to the right, those are all states we know are heavily Democratic. That's just a fairly natural division of the state. And at the extreme, you find states that only have 1 representative, and the other party in that that state is going to be disenfranchised because there's only one representative. The important thing is the folks in the middle, where the state is kind of close, but the representation is not. Yeah.
So, for example, North Carolina and Ohio, those two red dots down there, Wisconsin to a lesser extent, but if you look at this sort of bullseye, the vertical rectangle dotted line, you see these guys that are, if you look at the numbers, about, let's say, 50% Democratic vote, but the Democrats only got about 20% of the seats in North Carolina and Ohio.
But
See that?
And they got,
People see that in the graph? Can you see kind of how to read
in
that?
Alaska, Montana, they got 0.
Alaska, Montana, right.
Well,
And those are the weird ones where there's,
yeah, so
those are the weird ones, like
but Wisconsin is a real outlier, because if you look at the top part of the graph, there's nobody on the left side. And if you look at the bottom part of the graph, there's Wisconsin, who's it's showing up as a heavily Republican state, way over on the right side of the graph, which means they had a whole bunch of Democratic votes, but they're heavily Republican.
right.
Can you go back to the previous chart? Because I think there's an underlying thing that we haven't really talked about. In this example, we've got 60% blue and 40% red.
Voters.
We haven't really said what the representation ought to be. What's the right answer for how we do it? Because as you correctly pointed out, if you just draw precincts and these people are homogeneously distributed, that is 40% of every precinct is red and 60% is blue, then you're going to have 100% blue. Is that good or bad? Well, for each of the people in the precincts, they're going to say, well, that's good because my representative, most of the people, 60% of the people in each individual precinct are going to say, this is the way it should be because I am represented by somebody who thinks like my precinct, right? But on the other hand, as a whole, it doesn't give percentage representation to the minority, which is in this case the red. What should be the right answer?
So let me address that. The right answer is if the vote is 60% blue and 40% red, the seats should be 60% blue and 40% red.
Well,
and you could create.
See, I think we're making an assumption here that I'm not sure we would all agree with.
You could create districts that do that. You could have a district over here that's all red, another that's red, and then the districts are all blue.
Realize this is over and above saying I'm a red and I'm a blue and I want to advantage my color. I mean that actually is a gerrymandering with an evil intent, I would argue.
As if gerrymandering doesn't have an evil intent.
If your goal is to make sure that, seriously, if your goal is to make sure that 60% of the representatives are blue and 40% are red, and that doesn't naturally happen by some kind of normal, straight, square, whatever district line, then, but if that really is a good goal, then you don't necessarily have an evil intent for trying to achieve it, but you certainly are gerrymandering. You are drawing districts in order to try to determine the political outcome.
No, not just outcome, advantage. Gerrymandering implies advantage in terms of how it's defined.
Well, you are giving an advantage to a minority group that they would not otherwise have.
Let me add.
But go ahead and go on, because we could go down this rabbit trail for beer and pizza.
Let me attack your basic assumption. The districts, the precincts are not all homogeneous.
Oh, they are. I know they are.
And so you can draw them with different districts, different precincts, and get all the kind of results that we're seeing there.
Yeah.
May I give the advantage of the word gerrymandering? The practice of dividing or arranging a territorial unit into elected districts in a way that gives one political party an unfair advantage in elections. That's gerrymandering.
That's right.
Organizing your precincts so they fairly represent your population is not gerrymandering.
Right. And that's called redistricting. Redistricting. Right.
Is that the
I just want to make sure that this
demarcation?
chart, people understand this chart. So if you look at North Carolina and Ohio, somewhere around 50% of the vote share went Democrat, right? And you trace upward from the bottom. That's North Carolina and Ohio, roughly 50% Democratic vote share. And then you go over to the left, and you see it somewhere in the low 20s, is the seat share that the Democrats got in that state. Do you guys follow that? Does it make sense? Make sure we didn't lose anybody on this diagram because I'm going to go to another one.
Okay, I have a problem, maybe I'm having a problem reading the graph. But if I go up from where I think the 50% line is on the bottom axis,
Right? So I tried to put that should be dead center in the rectangular diagram.
You want to focus something on the
In the rectangle.
I'm not sure, at least on my eye, it doesn't get to 50%. It gets, but maybe I'm,
Yeah, I agree, but,
Well, it doesn't get 50% because now 50% people voted, more than 50% people voted for Democratic.
no, the diagonal line is they're supposed to be equal.
so here's about, somewhere around here is 50%, let's say, that's the Democratic vote share. You go up, there's North Carolina, right around 49, 50% Democratic vote share, but you go over here, Democrats only got 20-something.
Now, look, go up to the diagonal line on the 50%, and then go across.
So what he's saying is if you go up here to this line,
And then go
and then you
across.
go across, you don't come to 50. I think you do.
Okay, maybe I'm just, maybe it's.
The total
Parallax.
The total is at 54 on this graph. That's where the red dot is,
Okay,
where it should be, 54.
okay.
Okay? And it does look a little bit, yeah, because 50 is dead center in that, right, yeah, that's about right. So that's
That's at the
where,
top of the line, 100%. Okay.
so do you guys all get that? 'Cause I see some people that look like they're confused by that. Is that, you still, go ahead, Bill.
Got a Bill question for you. This is just Democrats. It's just the 2018.
It's 2018, but it's every state. It's not just Democrats, it's the Democratic vote share.
So when I look at Texas, it's got a blue dot. It appears to say that Texas voted 50.
Okay, ignore the red and blue for that purpose. The red is just showing, I just called it out using red.
But Texas is to the
Yeah.
left of the middle line. So Texas voted less than half Democratic, more than half Republican.
David,
But it wasn't that vote.
would there be a band
Because
of
of Houston and
Expectation.
Austin and Dallas.
But just
that
for
would
those
run
candidates that
plus
were
or
running.
minus the diagonal line?
That should be a lot more clustered on the diagonal line.
Yeah.
If everybody was honest, right? That's how it should run.
That's right, sorry.
Your regression line should be right along that middle, 45 degree angle.
Well, and that's why Wisconsin looks so bad.
Instead, that's visual, like, if I was to throw a regression across here, it's on this angle.
It's very steep, right? It shouldn't be.
It should
You should be clustered around the middle line.
It should be.
That's right. That's how they should be. I haven't thought about the applications of that one.
Because
If you put a regression line on this, what does that really tell you what's going on? But yeah, they should be in theory clustered around it. That's why it's interesting, the total is right where it ought to be. 54% Democrats,
I disagree with that. I disagree with
The
that.
total has to be where it ought to be.
I disagree with that. The reason that this is biased this way and that's biased that way is gerrymandering. If you didn't have gerrymandering, you would have only clustered in the middle.
Are you implying that Massachusetts?
No, it wouldn't be clustered in the middle.
Gerrymandering?
Yes.
Are you suggesting Illinois gerrymandering?
Yes. Let's be clear about this. Let's be clear about this. In the House, the seat gap is 0. What does that mean? It means that all the Republican gerrymandering on one side is offset by the Democratic gerrymandering in other states.
In 2018 only?
Yes.
I think the interesting look would be to go back and look at some of the earlier elections, which
Well,
were.
if you went back 40 seats, that whole curve would shift.
Yeah, in 2016.
It sure does.
In 2016, the Democrats got more votes for House members
Right.
and got fewer.
I think it was Avalon. This shows that the Democrats are favored.
So you're absolutely right. Why are the red dots? The bottom left is where
The red
Democrats
dots
have been
is,
gerrymandered against,
Yes.
on top of the Democrats.
Yes.
Are you related?
Yes.
Yeah, don't look at red and blue as winning or not for Democrats or Republicans. Don't look at it that way at all. It's just the default is blue, and the red, I just called out a few of them. if everybody was fair, if the Democratic vote share was identical to the seat share, all these dots would be right on that line. Okay? But they're not. And so for here, just I'll say it one more time, North Carolina, Ohio, about 50% of the Democrat, they got about 50% of the Democratic vote. The Democrats got only 23, 24% of the seats in that state.
But what you just said is completely wrong. They wouldn't end up on the line because you've got states like
It's a share.
you've got states that have a one representative. It'll never be on the line.
Although, yeah.
Okay, fair enough.
Those.
And you have states that are heavily Republican. They're never going to be on the line. That's not what's going to happen.
Heavily
It's fair.
Republican, you can still be on the line. Or heavily Democrat, you can still be on the line. But this is right about here, where you've got that weird 1 or 2 reps, then you could definitely be off. That's right. But generally, a good sized state, let's put it that way, a larger state with a bunch of reps, and they be on that line. And then like Florida's great, Colorado, they've done a great job of making their state fair. Because they're right there on the line. Florida, you can see them there in the middle. Let me show this another way. What this does is it takes this, the prior graph didn't tell you anything about the number of seats. This one does. So it's got the total number of seats in the House. Again, it's still 2018. That's running on the left axis. The axis along the bottom is the Democratic vote share minus the seat share. So it's taking those 2 axes on the prior page and subtracting one from the other. Okay? So if you are way to the right, okay, that is more favorable to Republicans. If you are more over on the left side, you're more favorable to Democrats. And so you can spot the ones that are more gerrymandered, or are, I shouldn't say gerrymandered, that indicates intent, where they're less fair in their outcome, gets farther and farther away from that center line. So let's use an example, and I put a couple up there to show it. Let's start with Ohio.
Where did Florida go?
Larger states which have more representatives would explode up the top of the graph.
Okay, I'm glad you said that. I took 4 of them off. California, Texas, New York, and Florida I removed because they're way up above, and yes, exactly as Carl said, all these other lines, all these other dots get compressed together, and you don't really get to see the differentiation. So I took those really big states out of there. I left Illinois just for fun, because we're all from here, so, or at least we're all living there. Ohio got 48% Democratic vote share, but the Democrats only got 25% of the seats. They got 4 out of 16 seats. Okay? And you say, where is the 48% Democratic vote share? You don't have all the data you need for that number, but it's, let me think here a second, as I am looking at this math. If we have all those numbers here, or if we don't.
So for the 20% shortfall,
Oh, sure we do. 48, yeah. Okay, 48 minus 20, 48 Democratic vote share minus 25% Democratic seat share is 23.
Right.
That's where the Ohio is on that bottom axis. There you go. Does that make sense? So 48 minus 25 is 23, and that's how you plot Ohio.
that would imply at least 3 additional seats in Ohio.
Yeah, I mean, it would be 7 out of 16 or 8 out of 16. If you had 9 out of 16, that would be too many.
But you can just see from this graph how it balances out nationwide right now.
So
So
Ohio,
that raises the question. Who goes first? Who fixes the problem first?
Well,
Because the Democrats are saying, oh, we want to be nice guys and we're gonna fix this gerrymandering.
I'm not going to do that.
And that's what they're doing in Illinois. And then the Republicans are saying, in the Democratic states, Republicans have big campaigns going to, like Fair Maps, which is almost exclusively Republican funded in Illinois, that they want us to fix our problem. They are not funding that anywhere on the right side of that chart.
It has to be federal.
But that's why it's got to be done at the federal level.
Yeah, it's got to be federal, and it's got to be done by 2020 when they do the census, or where.
Well, no, it'll continue to be balanced. Look, this is not.
Doesn't it get redone when we do this?
well, let's be clear about what we're looking at here. The House ended up exactly where it should have
That's
overall,
what the census is
54-54.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can see when you look at this, just generally, everywhere and I have to do more math on this to look at it for sure, but when you look at this, it looks pretty evenly split left to right, as I said earlier. You've got Ohio and North Carolina that are probably gerrymandered for the Republicans. You've got New Jersey and to a much lesser extent Illinois, gerrymandered for Democrats. And you can look at the results. For Illinois, 61% Democratic vote share, 72% Democratic seats. We got 13 of the 18 seats. We should have had 11? I had to do the math. So we got a couple seats extra. New Jersey, though, 61% Democratic vote share, 92% Democratic seats. That is definitely, out of control, crazy. If I were a Republican, I would be very unhappy with the New Jersey setup. So it takes a little bit of math, a little bit of getting used to this, but hopefully those captions help you see it. And here you can also see the total number of seats, which the last diagram made it difficult to see.
Yeah, the surprise in Illinois was Caston and Underwood shifted 2 seats from Republican to Democrat, or we wouldn't have 11 seats and come a lot closer.
Yeah, except except I wasn't a surprise. Those of us who worked their asses off for casting knew it was going to happen.
Now,
Well, but compared to 2016, 2014, those were, especially the Kane County Underwood seat going Democratic.
So this should be a bipartisan issue.
yes, and understand too that at the federal level, things don't look that crazy out of whack, one party versus the other, but that is not necessarily the case in the state and local stuff.
Bingo.
Let's look at that, which is
Oh, you got that.
He's
well,
got that.
kind of, not with this kind of a data, with that kind of number crunching. I can't find the data set. If one of you guys has found it, I would love a copy of it, but I don't have it. So the AP, this is a, when I was researching this, because I don't, this isn't an area I normally do a lot of research in. The Associated Press did a really nice study, and they have several different links to it. So they have sort of a main document, and they have some analysis that they did, but I don't have the raw data set. So they said, and here this page talks about, let's see, they talk about, they mix the state and the federal a little bit here, but this first sentence is very telling. And note also, I'm talking about 2016 here, not 18. I don't have an 18 data for this. 4 times as many states with Republican skewed state, house, or assembly districts than Democrats. That is what we're up against. I assume that has not changed in 2018, but I don't have the data, so I don't know. But that first sentence tells us that this is not the situation at the state level. This is the situation for the House of Representatives. When you get to the state assemblies, things are much more Republican skewed. At least they were in 2016.
You have a graph on that, don't you?
Okay, well, let me show you that one.
State house races.
Yes, but it's not as good as the other one, I don't think. Question on this?
Says
All right. And then the last paragraph talks about they won 22 additional U.S. seats over what they should have in 2016. Some of that was fixed by 2018, which had a much more. Yeah, yes, we do have a little bit of data here. This is also from the AP study. There's a lot more, by the way. I just couldn't fit it all here on the screen. But this one, okay, now these are state house races. And when the dark circle is to the right of the light circle, or the empty circle, that tells you that they were getting more seat share than vote share.
Yeah, this is a graph of seat cap by state.
Yeah.
And it's pretty clear that the Republicans have really outnumbered the Democrats in gerrymandering at the state level.
At the state level, we're getting our butts kicked. This is 2016. I don't have this for 18. Doesn't mean it's not out there. I just have not found it. So if any of you are feel like you can run across it, that would be great. The Cook Political Report does a nice job with you can download the spreadsheet for the House races, but I haven't seen that kind of data yet for the individual, for the House of Representative races. I haven't seen it for the state House level races.
Okay, I think they showed the state.
Do you have the other half of this data for California, and Illinois, and New Jersey?
Oh, I have it. Oh, yeah, I've got it all, but I don't have it handy. But
You don't have the slide?
no, I don't have another slide that has it on it. I think it's in the longer presentation, but I don't have that handy.
Okay.
So the problem we have, and it's not as glamorous to me as fighting. I like federal stuff, but the state seems to be where the action is. So when and I think I have a slide here. There it is. The NDRC has asked for our help in spreading the word on this sort of thing. And so I'm going to be looking for that data, see if I can find it and start graphing it out. But the idea is that we want to get these fair election maps at the state level for the state houses and overcome some of that Republican advantage that they had, at least in 2016. And that the OFA can help educate people. So at least today you get a little bit of education around gerrymandering, how to measure it, the kind of data that it takes to sort of get your arms around is understanding this vote share versus seat share idea and how you can plot that and look at it. So this is, I know you can't read some of that stuff on the left, but at the website for the NDRC, you'll see some of those statements around what their mission is. And if you can't, if you have time, make a donation. That's what I did. Just made a $100 donation to these guys, get them going. And then started my own research and trying to understand this stuff. And Ed and Carl gave me some feedback. I don't know if Bill has yet, but you guys gave me some real helpful feedback on an initial presentation, and we'll keep working on that, make it better. But I need to get at more of the state level data.
So there's an NWSOFA group in this particular area, and I'm sure they would benefit from your numerical analysis of this data. And I expect you've shared your slides with them.
Oh, whoever wants it. Yeah, you give it to them. You're welcome to take the stuff.
Who are the leads in that? Kathy and Kim?
Kathy Carter, Kim Garnett.
Then you need to share your data with them.
Happy to do that.
I think they've got, when we had the first two sessions on that with Eric Holder live streamed in, these maps and a lot of that was already used.
Oh, yeah. One thing that I didn't share here today is that when you look at this sort of a diagram going back historically, the Democrats have benefited historically from the gerrymandering, and more recently the Republicans seem to have figured out how to do it. In the last few elections, the Republicans had an advantage in the House race.
Yeah, I'm sorry you took that slide out. That was an illustrative slide.
Yep. So, in other words, we're getting a dose of our own medicine more recently. Let's put it that way.
I'd also like to point out that if you actively do gerrymandering, what you're doing is you're narrowly winning in a bunch of districts. Okay, that's a trade-off you make. And if you fall out of favor, now you will narrowly lose in a bunch of districts.
Unless you re-gerrymander.
That's a good point. Some of that happened, I suspect.
I suspect some of that did happen.
There were some interesting graphs that the New York Times had that showed a lot of there were individual states. They showed a lot of the individual seats within certain states. Say North Carolina, they're showing all 14 or whatever of the seats. They were showing how they moved much closer to Democratic wins in the last election. So you saw that. You can imagine sort of the sliding bar, if you will. They slid from that Republican territory toward parity or toward Democratic territory. So a lot of Democrats made up a lot of ground because they didn't always win. But still, we got a fair result in terms of 54% of the popular vote and 54% of the seat representation. All right, last subject, which will be short. There's one of our new heroes, AOC. A little background on her. Woo! Go, girl. She has an economics degree. Yes, she does. From International Relations and Economics.
From where?
From Boston, which is an Nevada University, by the way. Yeah, quite a good school.
She doesn't talk like it. That's another story.
Yeah, she has some of that background, and she won very handily, not only over Crowley, her Democratic primary victim, but also she crushed the Republican, almost 80% of the vote there, although apparently that was the easier hurdle for her. Crowley was the big one.
In that district, it's amazing they even run a Republican.
They're gluttons for punishment. She has some couple interesting things that couple quotes here. This is an interesting one. Not trying to win over your opposition, not trying to rush to the center, but get sort of the populist people, the angry and the disenchanted, off the sidelines to win. Which I haven't heard this message otherwise. We don't usually think this way as Democrats. We're always like, should we be more like, Clinton and Obama, or should we be more like AOC or Bernie? It's not just, we have this populist message to bring out a bunch of people that haven't voted before, whether they're younger or just generally don't vote. So that was an interesting idea, broadening the base, widening the number of people that are voting and not necessarily just getting your own crew out there, that there's this large number of people that don't vote at all, that maybe they could become Democrats that are sitting out there. Kind of like when we talk about the unemployed, we think about those that are outside the labor force, kind of outside the voting force, if you will. And this is an insight that she had. Doesn't mean it'll win everywhere, it just is something that worked for her. And it's just, something worth thinking about. I saw this when I was looking through some of her quotes. The kinds of things she's advocating are what you would expect to be a progressive left policy, but pretty far out left, not middle of the road left. And you guys can read these, but I mean, I don't think there's too many surprises here. I think canceling student debt is one I think is fascinating. It would be a really interesting economic experiment to print the money and just eliminate that.
There's an awfully good moral argument for that, which you never should have allowed it to accrue in the first place.
I'm with you. Yeah.
So what do you do about the people who have paid off their loans?
Yeah,
They won't be happy about it.
not going to be fair to
Why
them.
were you helping them but not
What do
me?
you do about the person who labored all day in the vineyard and the guy who came for the last hour got the same pay?
Yep, that's
You
right.
tell them to read the Bible.
So,
No, but I mean, you do have the flip of that. You have the people who did not go straight to college. They worked a job and put themselves through for 10 years.
I just answered that.
Yeah.
So this argument came up in the, what do they call it, moral hazard. I mean, the people that worked really hard to pay off their mortgages, what if you bail out the homeowners? You know, back in 2008 and 09, that was a big deal. Oh, we can't bail out the homeowners, but what about all the people that, I mean, you know. Okay.
Oh, you
So
want
this is-
to
all right,
speak to that topic?
But we bail out the banks.
So if you
No, even better. Contracts are sacrosanct,
Right.
okay, except for the United Auto Workers.
Okay, if you want a real answer for that, what do you do about the people who pay up their loans? You give them back what they paid.
There you go. Fair enough. I'm all for it. So I think it would be a great idea, a great experiment to see if we get inflation. Who brought that up earlier, where we would we get a gigantic amount of inflation if we just printed $1 trillion and wiped off the.
Are you suggesting also, as part of that, that we continue to do that going forward and make education free, or are you
Yes,
just
of course.
suggesting?
Well, that's what 2 says.
You
You
bet.
public education trade school 16 years, and then you cancel the outstanding debt you never should have created in the first place.
Those are separable, though, in my view.
They are separable, but number 2 includes both of them.
Yeah, I see that, but that's.
So I think more to come on these issues. We'll talk more about these in future meetings. I want to spend some more time on AOC economics. I just wanted to throw it out there for you guys
What
today.
does federal jobs guarantee mean?
Means it's basically the WPA and the CCC.
All right. And yes.
Well, that's a big mistake.
Okay, well, that's what we'll talk about. We'll bring it up in a future meeting because we're low on time today. This is just another, I went through this with the text slide last time, but here are some of the big numbers on taxing the rich more. And so, shh, is that us or is that? I was wondering if they were piping that in to kick us out of all these rooms.
That's nice.
So just remember, not all these are cumulative, meaning you have to pick and choose from these. You can't have, you can't, for example, increase the top marginal rate to 57% for the top 1% and increase the top marginal rate to 73% for the top. I mean, there will be those offset, right? I mean, those are, you can go, yeah. So some of this math that you should not look at as all of them are alternatives that we have. You have to pick and choose from. Some of them are overlap each other. But generally, this was something that different people all were coming out of the woodwork, AOC included, saying, here are some things I would like to do to tax people more, and here are the amounts, and those are in billions. So 3,000 on here means $3 trillion over 10 years. And remember, our debt addition over 10 years is somewhere around 13 trillion now. It was about 10 when Trump took office, and he added another 3, or actually 9.5, added 3.5.
You professor think this
So this is
$10 trillion on all that.
well, again, you can't take it all, and plus there will be this idea of avoidance to some extent. But if you think through these, you'll realize not all of them, like I used the example of the first one and the fifth one, you can't do both of those. You pick the first one or you pick the fifth one as an example.
Can't have it either.
But these things, the CBO did something interesting. He said, if you increase the tax rate by 1% for the top 2 brackets, that's the last item on here, just by 1% for income over 200,000, that's 123 billion. So you can multiply that out. You could raise that by 5, 10, 15, 20, although bear in mind you're going to have some kind of a, it's not going to be one-to-one, that curve's going to bend, but still, you can kind of do the math in your head if you want to play around with these numbers. They are there. One thing that I didn't include it in the final presentation, but I want to include it in a future meeting. The Congressional Budget Office does a deficit, I don't remember the name of the report, but it's called deficit options or something to that effect, deficit reduction options. They have, it's like hundreds of pages long, and it has one proposal after another. They're not advocating one over another, CBO doesn't do that, but they have 200 deficit solution alternatives you can choose from, all scored out for 10 years in there with a chart usually for each one, or at least a table. So I'll share, I took a bunch of my favorites out of there, and we'll share that in a future meeting, but it does this same kind of thing, but this last item is a CBO. It's one of those solutions is increase the tax rate by 1% for the top two brackets. Modern monetary theory also will be a nice, fun discussion that we will have in a future meeting. You're going to hear about this in the news a lot if you haven't already. The idea, there are a couple big ideas, and I'm learning more about this now, so I don't claim to be a pro on this. A couple things they're doing. It's the idea that the government is not limited in what it can spend by tax revenue. It can print as much money as it wants to pay for stuff. It is limited by inflation. Okay? And the way that the government controls inflation is by, after it's pumped a lot of money into the system, it taxes money out of the system. It's like you put money in the bathtub, and that's GDP. You drain some of that out with your taxes. Go ahead.
Do you really mean printing money, or do you mean borrowing from Fed?
No, I mean, well,
Spending money.
There's going to be a huge
I'm not sure those are different. Spending money.
So,
What does Krugman say?
you know,
He really hasn't said a whole lot.
yeah, he's on the fence right now.
He's kind of on the fence on this one.
Yeah.
But he leans in that direction when he says that we should be spending more money in a contraction.
Well, that's not the same as this. This is pretty wild.
But he also was pointing out that there hasn't been any inflation from what looks to be a massive Keynesian stimulus for the last 12 years.
$13 trillion was added to the world economy since 2008.
And we can't even avoid deflation.
So the key
So the
thing,
theory, the Keynesian theory is not working, basically.
the Keynesian idea meaning we're not stimulating by doing all that.
Right.
It's not creating
We're not
inflation.
stimulating ourselves into inflation, which is what we should have been doing.
Yeah, there's some slack in there that we don't
But,
understand.
but I was listening to an interview with Stephanie Kelton,
Oh, yeah, sure. She's one of the-
and she's the guru.
Yes.
And she was saying, all this seems to work. And the guy asked her, could it be made to work? And she said, that's where the short side is. Because this requires management. And she said, I wouldn't trust the Congress to properly manage, to control, to raise taxes when it's necessary.
Yeah.
And she said that's the short side of it. And actually, it turns out if you use the theory, MMT, and apply what they've actually done, it pretty well fits. And the mismanagement came from tax rates.
Interesting. Yeah.
So to me, the counterintuitive part here is, where is the value going? I mean, if it were going into consumption, it would cause inflation. But it's not going into consumption. It's going into capital,
Right.
which is counterproductive because we don't need any more capital.
Okay. So more to come on this. There's a lot of interesting stuff underneath this. But this idea that, because we think about, as households, we think we get a certain amount of income and that's all we can spend, and we have credit cards that are limited to a certain amount. The government doesn't have that constraint. Government can print and spend as much money as it wants. It is not beholden to tax revenue. But if you start to get serious amounts of inflation, those dollars don't go as far. In order to limit that inflation, the government then taxes. And that's a different way of thinking about things. Most people, I think, in their mind, that I have always thought of as the government has to take in a certain amount of tax revenue, And if it doesn't, and it wants to spend more than that, it's got to go borrow it from an investor, right? That's what issuing a bond to the world is. The government, the MMT says, no, you can just print the money. Government can print it.
Yeah, I think the borrowing is actually harmful. I've thought that for a long time, and they have a flawed economic model of that too. But, you know, it's always looked to me like, gee, we have to pay that back with interest. You know, whereas if you print it, you don't ever have to pay it back.
That's one of our future meetings. We'll go through this, and we'll have a lot of sources in there. I've been getting, I'm part of a group on Facebook now called, I'm going to forget the name of it, it's MMT something. And so people in that group are starting to, I'm catching on a lot of the videos and links to things, and I've asked them a few questions and put some graphs out there for them to chew on. So there's a lot of other theory behind this that's interesting, but this insight of the government is not limited by its tax revenue is fascinating, and I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about it from AOC and others, and you'll be hearing a lot more of it from me and Carl in here. Whether we agree with it or not, we'll at least try to explain it. It'll be a fun challenge, and you guys will have an interesting time with it too, I think. So you had an article that you were interested in. I think we're low on time here, but if not this time, maybe next time we will cover it, and we'll cover it at, I'm sure we can cover it at Luminati's. But it's this idea of, if I remember it correctly, if the government, and we'll have some slides on it next time, so we'll give it the right treatment. If the government is, what's the right word I'm looking for? We have the currency, the world's reserve currency. That gives us certain advantages. If we give that advantage up, what are the consequences to us of the dollar? Let's say it becomes the euro or the yen becomes the reserve currency. What does that do to the U.S.? That's how I interpret
The Chinese currency.
the renminbi.
Well, what's funny about the Chinese currency is they would have to let it float.
Anyone know